Thanks, Kerry. If you're just tuning in, early figures in New South Wales and Queensland are favouring the Coalition. Let's unpackage some of it. In terms of the seats won so far, the Labor Party has 65. That's a loss of 12 seats for them. The Coalition on 59 seats, having picked up 12 seats. The Greens, no seats at this stage in the House of Representatives, and the Independents have 3 seats there. That's with about 40% of the vote counted. How's the primary vote looking? Let's take a look at our primary vote bar graph. The Labor Party has about 38% of the primary vote, 43% for the Coalition. The Greens polling about 11.6% of the primary vote, and about 6.6% going to minor and other parties. In terms of the way that compares to 2007, we're seeing a 5.4% swing away from the ALP, a 1.6% swing to the Coalition, a 3.8% swing to the Greens, and you'd remember that obviously some Greens preferences are going to go back to Labor, a lot of Greens preferences will go back to Labor, and a 0.1% of a swing away from the other minor parties and independents. The Chamber, how is that looking at this stage of the night? The ALP has 65 seats, the Coalition 59, none for the Greens, as I said before, and also reiterating 3 seats for independents with about 40% of the vote counted. When we include the seats that are likely to be won by any one of the major parties, we end up with the Labor Party with 68, the Coalition 63, none for the Greens, and again 3 for the independents. Now, everybody's expected that this election would be close, and that means the role of independents in the House of Representatives could be crucial, as we've been hearing. There are 3 independents currently. All 3 of them will be returned. Let's take a quick look at all of their seats. New England, Tony Windsor, he will be easily returned, a 4.4% swing to him with about a third of the vote counted, easily coming back in. In line on the New South Wales North Coast, Rob Oakeshott was going to easily hold on to that seat as well, a very popular local member. Kennedy, Bob Katter's electorate in North Queensland, with about a third of the vote counted, almost a 10% swing to Bob Katter there. Again, he will be easily returned. I want to mention a couple of seats in New South Wales that the panel were just talking about. They were affected by the redistribution I spoke about earlier. Now, the seat of Greenway, the boundaries were redrawn, and Labor would have been expecting to hold on to that seat pretty comfortably, but there is a 5.6% swing going on to the Liberal candidate there, which means it's a seat that's in doubt for Labor. So that would be causing some concern for them. The seat of Macquarie as well was another seat that was affected by the redistribution. The boundaries were substantially redrawn, and they really affected and cut back the margin for Labor. The sitting Labor MP, Bob Debus, was retiring, and you can see that it looks like there's a 2.2% swing there to the Liberal Party, and our computer is predicting at this stage a Liberal gain. So a couple of seats there that Labor was hoping to hold becoming real contests and difficulties.
Okay, now I mentioned a few minutes ago that there was some kind of voting irregularity or problem in the seat of McEwen in Victoria. This is a seat, much of the seat is in the area of Victoria that was devastated by those bushfires last year, and was held by Fran Bailey. We'll just take a look at the seat before we cross into McEwen to find out what's gone on. It would appear, with 37% of the vote counted, that this is now a safe ALP gain. Anthony?
Yeah, Fran Bailey won this at the 3rd count last time, I think by only 31 votes after the High Court looked at it. Rob Mitchell's well ahead on the first preference votes. There's a substantial vote there for the Greens. When we factor in, you always have to wait for the last booth in this electorate. It comes right into the northern parts of Melbourne. But there's a 5% swing to the Labor Party. And at this stage, we've got that as a Labor gain, unless there's other information which would change that view.
Probably not, but we'll find out. We've got Lisa Maksimovic, an ABC reporter, standing by in Kinglake in the seat of McEwen. Lisa, what can you tell us?
Well, as you say, it's looking like there's a swing to Labor at the moment, but I'm at the Liberal camp at the Kinglake Football Club, and they're certainly not willing to concede defeat just yet. As you mentioned, McEwen is certainly a seat that is not shy of controversy in the past. It was the most marginal seat in the country in 2007, won by a margin of only 31 votes to Fran Bailey in 2007. So clearly votes are very important coming down to the wire here, and we've heard from Liberal scrutineers that this afternoon at a polling booth in Epping, they actually ran out of of voting papers. The AEC then shut the polling booth down for several hours until they could ferry some more papers to the station. They reopened it, and we've been told that at least 100 votes will be deemed invalid because, in fact, the officials there at the electorate forgot to sign them correctly. So at least 100 votes, possibly more, deemed invalid for McEwen.
Lisa, thank you for that. Now, is that going to have any bearing on the outcome?
Not unless it would have changed the result.
Kerry, I've just had an update on Aston, which is one of the seats we're obviously worried about. It's now got 54.2% counted, and we're on 51.1% two-party preferred. So that seat's looking somewhat more comfortable for us, but it's one we're going to have to watch all night.
I agree with that. Aston's slipping for us.
Can I also add?
I remember Aston in the by-election. That was a turning point for John Howard that got him back in the game in 2001.
Yeah, and we were sorry to lose Chris Pearce, of course, but if we can hold that without his vote, that's great.
Can I also say that the Greens have slipped into second place in Grayndler, and Anthony Albanese's vote's below 46%. Now, I think he'll get up on those figures, but if the Greens finish second in Grayndler, it's much closer than expected.
What's Albo's primary vote?
45.8, so he'll get up.
He'll win on that.
Okay, well, we'll continue the seat run. We're going to look at the seat of Ryan in Brisbane. This was a seat that posed a problem for the Liberal Party not so long ago when the Liberal member, Michael Johnson, was disendorsed.
Well, in the end, it's not been a problem at all for the new LNP. Jane Prentice represents Walter Taylor Ward on Brisbane City Council, and she has done so for the last 10 years. She's pre-selected. Michael Johnson, the sitting member, has finished fourth with just under 9% of the vote. So the preferences in that seat are not going to be a problem. We've got a preference count in a substantial number of boos. There's a 6.3% swing, and the LNP have easily retained Ryan, and Jane Prentice will be the new member for Ryan.
The seat of Hinkler, again in Queensland, based around Bundaberg and Hervey Bay, just north of Brisbane, held by Paul Neville for the National Party since the Liberal National Party now since 1993.
Yeah.
Margin of 1.5%, you've got nearly 60% of the vote counted.
Yeah, it's hard to think of Paul Neville as anything but a National Party MP.
Right.
It's rather hard. We've got to get used to this new beast called the LNP. But Paul Neville's easily retained. He's got over half the vote. The Greens had to change candidate in that seat from member. Yes, they did, and that sort of hurt their vote. A 9.5% swing to the LNP, and no difficulty at all for Paul Neville being re-elected.
Okay, now we talked at the start of the night about seats like Solomon, a handful of seats around Australia, Labor seats that could become very critical before the end of the night, and this is the way it's headed. Now, Solomon is held by Labor's Damien Hale since the last election, based all around Darwin and Palmerston, on a very slender margin of 0.2%. We got 26% of the vote counted, and he might be in trouble.
Yes, he's in a great deal of trouble. It's a smattering of boos from all around Darwin and Palmerston, so there's nothing wrong with these boos. Natasha Griggs, 47.5%. She's the Deputy Mayor of Palmerston, so she's quite well known at that end of the electorate. 12.5% there with the Greens, but Damien Hale's primary vote is low at this stage. When you factor in the preference counts, well, we've only got one preference count from Tiwi, but I'd say on the shift of those primary votes, that swing looks correct. And Damien Hale is in a great deal of trouble. We're not giving it away to the CLP at this stage, but if he loses, that's another loss for the Labor Party. But
the seat of Ford, I think we are giving away. This in the outer southern suburbs of Brisbane, taken by Brett Raguse in 2007 for Labor, part of the Rudd swing. Margin of 3.4%, but with 60% of the vote counted, gone.
Yeah, he's defeated Brett Raguse after his one term in Parliament. He's out. Bert Van Manen will be the new member for Ford, for the Liberal Party. 43.9% vote there for the Greens and Family First, but we've got preference counts in 2/3 of the booths. That's indicating a swing of 5.8%. And the NLNP win that seat easily with Bert Van Manen, the new member for Ford.
As has happened in Leichhardt in North Queensland, from Cairns to Cape York. This was taken by Jim Turner in 2007 for Labor from Warren Inch, the Liberal member. But with 48.5% of the vote counted, Warren Inch is back.
An easy victory for... I thought he might have even got 50% of the vote, but he's got 46.3%. There's a number of independents contested the seat. At this stage, he's well ahead in that electorate. We've got preference counts in 29 of the 65 booths. That's a swing of 9.5%, and Warren Inch will be easily returned as the member for Leichhardt.
Warren Inch is standing by. Warren Inch, a swing of nearly 10% back to you, some vindication. Warren Inch, can you hear me?
Yes, look, I'm pleased to... Yes, I can, and I say to you, I'm pleased to see that, and as I've been watching the booths going, the results coming in, the ones that give me the greatest amount of satisfaction when I see places like Hopevale, Pomperau, the remote communities, Bamaga, places like that, where I'm suddenly seeing the Aboriginal people, our Indigenous people, suddenly really making a statement, and to me that is very, very special. I think what has happened in this seat in the last 2.5 years is that our incumbent, and I see it around the country, our incumbent has forgotten that politics is about people, it's not about parties. And I think it's wonderful now. We have a situation here where Far North Queensland has certainly lost its laryngitis, and I can no doubt at all it's found its voice.
The issue of the wild rivers up in your seat, was that pivotal at all?
Look, the dishonest campaign that was run by the Wilderness Society was absolutely appalling. They spent a lot of money doing very, very glitzy DVDs that were only for the city viewing. They run them in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, places like that. People had never ever seen it before. They had no idea that there was, the dishonesty that was there within the Wilderness Society. It was all about fundraising for that organisation. They gave no recognition at all. People, 40,000 years they've been looking after that country, and they decided that they had no capacity to do it anymore. The Aboriginal people in Cape York have been for decades trying to recover country, trying to regain some of their own homeland. They've now got that homeland, and the Wilderness Society is saying that they don't have the capacity to look after it, and they're trying to legislate to a point where they lock them up, so at the end of the day, the only thing that they can do is be naked blackfellas standing on one leg in a lily pond with a spear. Photo fodder for tourists. I've got to tell you that the Aboriginal people in Cape York have got a much greater vision, a much greater dream of what they want to do in the future for themselves and for their children, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they should be given the opportunity of doing it, not locked up by some ideologues from the Wilderness Society are more interested in pushing these agendas to raise money for their own organisation rather than worrying about the welfare of our Indigenous Australians.
And Warren Entsch, in 3 years you haven't forgotten how to make a point. Congratulations on winning your seat. Thanks for talking with us.
Thank you very much. It's been, look, I've got to say to you that I haven't won this seat. There are a lot of people out there. There are people that have been affected by a whole range of actions or inactions by the current government. It's those people that have come out and they have now found their voice. And I'm proud to be able to sit here tonight and say, well, rightio, whether you're an Indigenous Australian or whether you're somebody in Cairns, somebody from our Torres Strait communities, my door is always open, and I don't care what your political persuasion is. I mean, I will certainly take up those issues. I will certainly, can't guarantee 100% that I will solve the problems, but I'll give them 100%.
Warren Entsch, thanks for talking with us. We're going to. No, he hasn't.
Welcome back, Warren.
All right.
We're going to continue the seat run. We're going to take a look at the seat of Banks. There was a brief moment earlier where this looked a little bit of bother for Daryl Mallam. Held it on a margin of 10.4%. This is in Sydney's southwest suburbs. We've now got 60% of the vote count, and he can relax.
And Ron D'Alessio, the Liberal candidate, is the father of Sophie D'Alessio, who is the young girl who was badly injured in a car accident a number of years ago. Daryl Mallam's well behind, but we do have the Punchbowl and Riverwood booths coming, which are really solid for Labor. And we factored that into our prediction, and it's showing a 6.7% swing, but Daryl Mallam will win the seat. Again, that's one of those seats which was heavily affected by the redistribution, and the early figures may have been from one part of the electorate and showed a larger swing. I'll just toss in as a point here, for the first time tonight, that the national figure has been reached 50-50, rather than Labor behind for the first time tonight. But that's just an indication at this stage.
Which, yes, an indication, but it doesn't necessarily translate to seats.
The voting is only just started being counted in Western Australia, so that would slip back under if Labor does badly in WA.
OK, now the seat of Aston we've talked about. There was a point there where it looked like the Liberal candidate in what has been a Liberal seat might have been in trouble. They're on a margin. Chris Pearce is the retiring MP. Alan Tudge is the Liberal candidate. Margin of 5%. 64.5% of the vote now counted, Anthony.
And apologies to Mr. Pearce, his picture was there last time I looked at that graphic, but I mean, it's not a slight on him.
Gone, but possibly not forgotten.
Anyway, but he will be more than happy to see that Alan Tudge is leading there on those votes again from Labor's Rupert Evans. There's only 4 candidates in this contest. This has occurred in a lot of Victorian electorates. And we're seeing quite a vote there for Family First as a result. 3.9% swing to the Labor Party. At this stage, we're saying it's a Liberal retain. So that one slipped back onto the Liberal side of the equation, and that's not marked in as a Labor gain anymore.
Okay, now the seat of Melbourne, which is right in the heart of Melbourne, and this has been a Labor stronghold for just about a century. Lindsay Tanner's gone, and Labor, he's retired, but Labor's lost the seat.
Yeah, we don't have exact booth figures in this electorate, which makes us more cautious in giving the way. But the Labor Party, with only 41% of the 41.6, is in deep trouble in Kath Botel. That's the sort of Senate vote Labor used to record when Lindsay Tanner was the sitting member. But that's a swing of 7.9% to the Greens. And our estimate is the Greens are ahead and on track to win. We're not giving it away yet. But it's a battle between 2 left-wing industrial lawyers, and one of them's going to win, and it looks like it'll be from the Greens.
We'll take a brief look at the Prime Minister's seat of Lawler in Melbourne's outer southwest. Julia Gillard has held this since 1998. Safe margin, as you'd expect, of 15.5%. With 40% of the vote counted, she's actually recorded quite a big swing to her.
Oh, a substantial swing. It's a very safe lap. It includes Melton, Werribee, Hoppers Crossing, those areas those satellite cities to the west of Melbourne. Julia Gillard's on 64.2. Sheridan Ingram's roughly only got a third of that vote. Not much vote for the Greens. There were some other candidates standing on various issues. 73.5%. That's the safest seat we've seen all night because we don't often cover these seats. But that's an 8% swing to Julia Gillard, and I'd take a guess that's probably the biggest swing to Labor in any electorate in Australia at the moment.
Okay, now we're going to go to a seat in Sydney called Warringah on Sydney's lower North Shore and extends down to Manly. And this is held by Tony Abbott, and he's also recorded a swing.
Yes, and
not as big as Julia's.
Yes, the fourth candidate there, Alexander Jacob Gutman's also known as the comedian Ostentatious. So he's got 2.7% of the vote there for the Australian Sex Party. But anyway, back to Tony Abbott, 58% of the vote, 22% for Labor, 16% for the Greens. The Greens are doing very well in safe Liberal seats on the North Shore. And when we look at the preferences in that, what we're seeing is a swing of 4.3% to Tony Abbott, and he increases his majority back into double figures. And at the end of the night, Tony Abbott will be declared the member for Warringah.
Okay, now the situation continues to unfold, and we'll have some more breaks, I think, to give you a fresh picture very shortly. But we're going to cross for a moment to Tony Jones on the tally room floor with Concetta Fioranti-Wells, a Liberal Senator from New South Wales, and Paul Howes, a trade union leader with the Australian Workers' Union.
Okay, Concetta Fioranti, you've actually had a watching brief on a lot of New South Wales seats. Give us your take on what you're seeing.
Look, I think we're seeing certainly the results in Bennelong are very, very good. Very happy with those. Macquarie, I think that's at the moment looking good. Hughes, I think, is also looking good. Gilmore. Lindsay and Greenway are still too close. Greenway is a very interesting seat, and I think that's been a surprise for the Labor Party. Our candidate, James Diaz, is doing very, very well in that seat. I think it was one of those seats that perhaps the Labor Party may have taken their eye off, but he's certainly doing quite well out there. Certainly Robertson, Dobell, Robertson's still very, very close. Eden Monero still quite close, but I think in the end there have been 3 factors. One, of course, has been the sandbagging that the Labor Party have done in seats there, the redistribution, and we are seeing the effect of the redistribution in some of those seats, but most importantly, local elections. This particularly
You're not accusing the Labor Party of organising the redistribution, surely?
No, I'm not. No, I'm just saying that there are different factors at play in different seats, and some of the results that we're seeing, I think.
Okay, briefly, I think you've got aren't you the patron of the Senate patron of Bennelong? So you've definitely got a new member in Bennelong, John Alexander.
I'm definitely keeping a very close eye. I think at this stage it's not to the point of calling yet, but certainly we're very happy with the results so far in Bennelong.
Okay, let's hear from Paul Howes. And Paul Howes, this story in New South Wales and Queensland, big swings against Labor. What are your thoughts on where this is going to end up, first of all?
Well, clearly a big swing, which was predicted by everyone. Nothing surprising there. I agree. Some of these seats, Bennelong is going to be very difficult for Labor to retain. Lindsay the same. Greenway, it's only 10% of the electorate counted there, so I wouldn't get too overly excited about Greenway. I think it's an amazing result that we're still in play in Robertson, and certainly speaks volumes about our candidate Deb O'Neill there that we are still in contention in Robertson. I don't think the Coalition are getting the numbers that they need out of Queensland in particular to form government in their own right, but it's still very close. And I think
have you done sums on what you think you're going to end up at?
Well, guesstimates, rough guesstimates, I think that we may be at the moment at 75, and that means that we're going to have to, that all eyes will be on Western Australia in terms of the result that we get out of that state, whether we retain Hasluck, whether we pick up Swan. They'll be very difficult calls for Labor to pick up, but I don't think there's any likelihood at the moment of a majority Liberal government, but certainly there's been a lot of swings and roundabouts. Some of these seats that should have naturally fallen to the Coalition haven't. Some seats which I didn't think would fall have, and certainly it's demonstrating that this is a very state-by-state election. Victoria is a thumping result from Labor in Victoria, thumping result. The fact that we're in contention in Dunkley is amazing, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes towards the end of the night.
Nice optimistic assessment from you, Paul Howes, but at what point do senior Labor power brokers start to think it may have been a terrible mistake to get rid of a Queensland Prime Minister, now that you've found that Queensland voters have been waiting for you with baseball bats?
Well, the reality is, Tony, that Labor was behind in the polls when Kevin Rudd was leader, and we're behind in the polls today. That was the case 2 weeks before there was a leadership change. I don't believe that there is a big personal issue in Queensland about Kevin Rudd. If you look at the bunting that the Liberal Party had throughout Queensland today, it wasn't about Kevin Rudd, it was about Anna Bligh. The Liberal Party's run a very mischievous campaign where they've tried to confuse state and federal issues both in New South Wales and Queensland. That certainly will have a large factor in terms of the swing.
So just to confirm this, you're not having any second thoughts at all about having gotten rid of a Queensland Prime Minister and basically putting this state of origin effect in play?
Well, I think the Parliamentary Party made the right decision then. I think they made the right decision today. And if you look at the Sky News exit poll, for example, that shows that Labor would have in fact done worse under a different leadership. Kevin Rudd has been campaigning very hard throughout this election. I think he was in Melbourne just a couple of days ago. He's committed to seeing Julia Gillard re-elected. Labor is united on this, and I think a lot of people, I think the Liberal Party are very disappointed. Some in the Liberal will be disappointed with the fact that they haven't done as well as they expected to do in some of those key Queensland seats.
Connie Fierravanti-Wells, let's hear from you.
Well,
I see you rolling
Paul,
your eyes while he was talking.
Well, obviously you haven't travelled, Paul, too much in Queensland.
I have, Connie, I have.
And certainly as I was travelling in Queensland, it was very obvious wherever I went that the fact that you did politically assassinate your leader at so close to the election, it does have, and I think the results are showing that, Paul, that it has had an impact. And certainly the many people that I spoke to said to me, and whether it was in Queensland or even in New South Wales, people said, I really don't like the way Mr Rudd was treated. And I particularly heard that from Labor voters, and in particular I heard that from Labor voters in Western Sydney. So I think by saying that it didn't have anything to do with it, well, that's obviously your line, but I think it's a bit naive to think that the Kevin Rudd factor didn't have anything to do with it.
Paul Howes.
Connie, Labor was behind. Labor, in fact, is doing better tonight based on these outcomes than we were in the polls when Kevin Rudd was the leader of the party. Now, it was always going to be a very tough election for Labor. There has never been a first-term government that's had an easy election. Think back to 1998 when John Howard lost the popular vote and lost around, 14 seats in that election. There was always going to be a number of seats that we would lose in Queensland. It was impossible to maintain the margins that we had on some of those seats.
All right, we'll have to leave you both there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
For being here.
Thanks, Tony.
And we've had a bolt from the blue in Tasmania. Elections always throw up surprises. The seat of Denison, it looks like we've got an independent. His name is Andrew Wilkie. He'd be well known for his various other attempts to win for the Greens and as an independent in other parts of Australia. It looks like he's got up in Denison, Anthony.
Well, he's not up yet. Anyway, let's explain this. Duncan Kerr is the Labor MP. Jonathan Jackson is the son of Judy Jackson, who's a former State Attorney General. And Cameron Simpkins was a late announced Liberal candidate. When we look at the first preferences, and we can't go on to the preference counts on this, Jonathan Jackson is ahead. But when you look at the percentages, he's only got 36. Andrew Wilkie is second with 22. Simpkins, the Liberal, is third with 21.7. And the Greens are fourth with 19. Now, the Liberals have directed preferences to Wilkie, and the Greens issued an open ticket. So I don't know what Green voters would have done. But on those numbers, Labor is in deep difficulty in that electorate. And if the Liberal preferences flow as suggested, and if the Green preferences leak to Wilkie, even half, then Andrew Wilkie will be the next member for Denison.
And he has run for the Greens himself in the past.
Yep.
Yeah, but hang on, the Liberal vote is only 100 odd behind Wilkie.
But the Greens are fourth. The Greens are fourth.
Yeah, but are they going to Labor or to Wilkie?
They've open ticket.
Open ticket, okay, so, yeah.
As long as he stays ahead of the Liberals, he'll win.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I will say this, though. What's not counted tonight is the pre-poll voting.
Yeah.
Independents don't usually do that well, and he's unlikely to do well in postal votes. But we will not know the result in Denison.
So it'll depend how far he is ahead at the end of the night. Have we got any fresh information here? I know, Stephen, you've been working and reworking your list. Where is it headed?
Well, I think we've lost 13, including Melbourne to the Greens. So lost 12 to the coalition.
Which puts you on the edge of losing.
Lost 12 to the coalition. We've picked up McEwen, so we've lost 11 to the coalition. On my count, we've got Solomon, Macquarie in doubt, but where the lever, I think, is tilted against us. Greenway.
So before you get to Greenway, that takes you back to 13 to the coalition.
Yeah. But it's, there's still more time on those two, but I think the lever's tilted against us. That's 13. Greenway, Morton, Lindsay Robinson, and Corangamite, I think they're all in doubt. On the most recent stuff I saw, Corangamite, Robertson, Morton, hopeful rather than confident. Lindsay and Greenway, so 50-50. So that's, if you assume the worst in Solomon and Macquarie, that's 13. There's 5 in doubt, which is 18. There's Latrobe and Dunkley, which is still possibles for us. Latrobe better than Dunkley. If it all goes bad, then you've got 18 down before we get to the west. So what I've been trying to calculate is precisely that. There are a lot of variables in that. Everything has to go the Liberal part, the coalition's way, for us to be essentially on 76 before we go to the west, bearing in mind that 76 notionally includes Hasluck and Swan. Does that help you?
So, well, all right. So now let's reduce it to the odds.
Well, I think it's your point earlier that everything might have to go right for us to end up with 76. I think we've got, certainly we'll have 3 independents, the 3 existing. We'll have a Green member for Melbourne. I think it's early days in Denison, frankly, so let's just wait and see how that one unfolds. But we, I think, are going to have to do better in the West than the West poll today exhibited to be on 76. Now, there's a lot of variables in that. As I say, the most recent ones I saw, Corangamite, Robinson and Morton, I wouldn't put it as high as saying the lever was tilted our way, but we're definitely in the hunt. And we have substantial amounts of pre-polls, some of which will be counted tonight. If you pre-polled in your own electorate, that'll be counted tonight. And postals which won't.
Yeah.
And the point I've made,
But the greater likelihood...
Postals are hard to read, but the first wave of postal ballot papers were distributed at the worst moment for us. Having said that, as a local member of Parliament, I have very efficiently organised postal votes for people who voted against me, so they're always hard to read.
But the sense of what you're saying is that the greater likelihood out of all of this is either a hung Parliament or a Liberal win.
Well, I must say I think hung Parliament is looking more and more likely. I can't yet find a 17 net for the coalition. I think that's true.
Sorry to interrupt. I can't find my 76. You can't find my
76 either. I think that's the position we're in, and particularly if they lose Denison and Melbourne. I mean, I've got a net gain to the Liberal Party of 15 at the moment. If we pick up
this must be very tantalising for you, Nick.
what
16.
are you counting in your 15?
Well, without running through them all, without boring the... you know, that's assuming some of those very doubtfuls do come across. But I think a hung Parliament is looking the most likely option at this point at 25 to 9 on Saturday night.
And then the next question becomes hung which way, and
that's right.
and how do the various independents respond to that?
Exactly.
So this is really the knife edge of all knife edges. Of any election I've been involved in, I think.
I'm told Anthony's computer has just given Latrobe to us, but I can't verify that from our own sources.
So what does that do?
That helps.
That takes it out of the doubtful and
puts it well. Okay. Us winning 2 is a big bonus, but as in Latrobe, as in others, there'll be a swag of pre-polls and postals.
Okay, we're going to take a look now. We're going to come back to looking at the breadth of swings in each of the states. And we're going to start with the state of Queensland, where I think we've got 56% of the vote counted.
And what we've seen in Queensland, swing not as big as News Poll suggested this morning, but still at 5.7%, enough to really hammer Labor. And I've lost count of how many seats there are, but it's more than 6. They wanted to keep that down to 3 to 4. And at this stage, that's 5.7% swing to the LNP in Queensland, and a big loss of seats there. In New South Wales, we've seen a slightly smaller swing, 4.9%, but we're left at the end of the night with quite a number of seats on the real doubtful category. Greenway and Lindsay, we will not know the result in either of those electorates tonight, would be my view there. So there's a long way to come there. In Victoria,
and before you go on, Stephen's writing off 9 seats to Labor in Queensland alone.
We've got 0.9% swing to Labor in Victoria. So Labor's improved his position and may yet pick up 2 seats, and he's hung on to Corangamite, which was a key loss, and hung on to Deakin at this stage. So Labor's done well in Victoria.
When you say hung on at this stage, Anthony, hung on or?
I just haven't looked at the figures for a while. Labor's held Corangamite. Labor's held Deakin. There's no difficulty there.
Right, okay.
Tasmania's gone the complete opposite way to the rest of the country, though we have had that surprise in Denison at this stage, but overall a swing to the Labor Party in Tasmania. We haven't had much chance to look at South Australia tonight, but let's have our first look at that chamber, a 0.6% swing to the Labor Party in South Australia. Now the next thing we're going to do is going to take a bit of a stab here about the overall result. And the reason I'm doing this, we're about to get WA to come in, and this shows you what all the numbers add up to in the eastern states. And assuming the Western Australian seats sort of fall the way they are currently, we get Labor on, I can't quite read that number. 76. And that's with WA to come. So if Labor loses a seat or 2 in WA, they're on 74 and they haven't got a majority. That also does not factor in Melbourne.
That's right.
And it doesn't factor in Denison. So if Labor's 76, they're actually down to 74 with those 2 seats as well.
I think you can factor in Melbourne. I'm not sure you can yet factor in Denison. Yeah. But your 76 includes Swan and...
that 76 is a probability-based estimate based on all the seats and the margins. It hasn't factored in any swing in Western Australia. If there's any swing in Western Australia, that number starts to drop and you get a hung Parliament.
So it's counting them at what they are, or what they were before the polls opened this morning.
Yeah.
And we're about
so this is tight. We'll continue the seat run. We've got some South Australian seats in play. Well, Sturt, Labor was hoping that Sturt would be in play, but it's not. This was Christopher Pyne's seat in the inner eastern suburbs of Adelaide. He was on a margin of 0.5%, but not any longer.
He appears to have been in no difficulty in the end. Christopher Pyne is the head there on the first preferences votes. We've got quite a vote there for the Greens, 10% for the Greens in that eastern parts of Adelaide. When we factor in the preferences and the polling booths, we've got a preference count in roughly half of the electorates, half the booths, 2.2% swing to the Liberal Party. And at this stage, Christopher Pyne back into the Parliament. He's the Liberal education spokesman and opposition leader of business in the House.
The seat of Boothby, and this is the one seat that Labor might still be hoping to get, but they're trailing. This is held by Andrew Southcott on a margin of 2.9% for the Liberals. And with 51.6% of the vote counted, there's been a 2% swing for Labor.
Too close to call at this stage. Andrew Southcott is ahead there on the first preference votes. Annabelle Digance, I think it's pronounced, 36.8. Fiona Blinko, 13.8 for the Greens. We're factoring preferences and booths. We've got 19 preference counts in 46 booths, of the 46 booths. A 1.8% swing, that's not quite giving it away. Still in doubt. We've got it leaning towards the Liberals, not quite given away yet at this stage. I think another half-hour counting will decide whether the Liberal Party will hold Boothby or not.
Okay, the seat of Kingston, also in Adelaide's southern suburbs, held by Amanda Rushworth for Labor since 2007. Sure. The margin of 4.4%. There's been a big swing to Labor there.
Well, this is a seat where I think it changed members at 5 of the previous 6 elections, and in this election, the margin is completely blown out for the Labor Party. The Liberals only selected a candidate, Chris Zanker, who's a local, he's a detective sergeant in the area, a senior inspector, I think. He was only selected very late and hasn't had much time on the ground. There's a 10% swing to Labor in Kingston. I'm sure Labor would have rather seen some of that swing occur in Boothby or Sturt.
And the seat of Grey, this is the outback of South Australia, held by Rowan Ramsey for the Liberals. He took over that seat at the last election. Margin of 4.4%, but again, this time there's been a big swing to the Liberals.
Of course, the seat was previously held by, I was going to say Darryl or Shane Wakeland, but I think they're his nephews. Barry Wakeland was the former member for Grey. He was the former member, retired at the last election, and there was a big swing against the Liberal Party that election. That swing's come right back now, and Rowan Ramsey's established himself in that election. Until 1993, that was a more often than not Labor electorate, but he's drifted well out of the Labor fold, as South Australia's, I think, lost 2 seats in that time.
It's a seat with a huge incumbency advantage of being so big. If you get in that seat, you can stay there.
I can't help but ponder as we sit here looking at this extraordinary situation that's unfolding at where national politics was 8 or 9 months ago, where Kevin Rudd was still Prime Minister for a start. He was still riding incredibly high in the polls, and of course the rest is history. It was just all downhill from there. And Stephen, you must sometimes wake in the middle of the night and break out and sweat at the thought of how Labor has squandered this incredible opportunity.
One thing we do know, I mean, firstly, there are some mistakes that we obviously made which have adversely impacted on us, but there's also much higher degrees of volatility these days. It is a very significant factor. In the old days, you could say, so 40% rusted onto Labor, 40% of the coalition who were fighting for 20. Now, you can probably say there's 30% rusted on to both parties, and you're fighting for 40 in the middle. And volatility, the swings are deep. If the election had been at the end of the first week of the campaign, everyone thought we would have won, and won reasonably comfortably. The end of the second week, we would have been smashed, because of...
And the big question mark at the top of all of this is, what if you'd waited till October? As I know many in your party were suggesting.
There are very many hypothetical situations you can throw up in the
fascinating ones that we'll never know the answer to now. But
that's right.
I'm sure there'll be people inside your party that will be very intent on asking that question over the next couple of days.
Well, win, lose or draw, I mean, all of those questions will always be asked. For the moment, we're not sure whether it's win, loss or draw. And I think Nick's heading to a draw. I can't. Just another quick count.
With a green balance of power probably in the Senate.
Well, I've used this phrase, I'm old-fashioned. Let's worry about the House of Reps first and worry about the
well, I'm thinking as a journalist here.
I must say it's difficult to see Labor finding the 76 seats.
I was just about to say, I've just done another trawl, and I got to 72, and I struggled.
Right.
That's. I'm not saying we'll end up on 72, but you find 55 to 60 very comfortably. You then go through them very carefully, and I get to 72, and I'm then saying, will we win a Hasluck or a Swan? Will we, hang on in a Robinson, etc.? And that's the dilemma that we have.
But equally on your side, Nick.
given where the politics was at 9 months ago, this is extraordinary. This should have been a cakewalk for the Labor Party to get a second term, and the collapse in Labor's standing in the last 9 months is extraordinary. And I've got to say, a great tribute to Tony Abbott. He's performed exceptionally well.
And another remarkable aspect of that is that he got there with 1 vote to spare.
Well, that's right.
And how different it might have been if Malcolm Turnbull had got that vote. And in fact, there was somebody who abstained and there was another absentee. But had he stayed as leader,
and
the
Kelly O'Dwyer and Paul Fletcher weren't in Parliament yet.
The ETS would have gone through. And when Labor did go to an election, there was one big issue that would have been totally negated because the Liberals could hardly have campaiged against it.
Yeah.
So
well,
an amazing set of circumstances.
But you're right, and the collapse in Kevin Rudd's standing in that period was just phenomenal, and Labor has reaped a whirlwind from from what's occurred.
Well, talking about climate change and the emissions trading scheme and all of those things, we're going to take a very quick look at the seat of Melbourne, which is now most likely to be in the hands of the Greens, thanks to a very substantial degree to Labor's climate change policies. This was Lindsay Tanner's seat. He's retired at the election. He held it with a 4.7% margin. With 39% of the vote counted, Anthony, how does it stand?
This one looks like a safe Green gain at this stage. Lindsay Tanner's
two Canning booths.
Lindsay Tanner's first preference vote was consistently 10% lower than Labor's Senate vote. And on these figures, the Greens are on 36.7. They will go on to win this electorate. There's a 7.6% swing. We are giving this as a Green gain, and Adam Bant is about to become the first Green member elected at a general election. Member of the House of Representatives.
And I've got Adam Bant standing by in Melbourne, but just before we cross to him, I'm going to tantalise you a little because Stephen Smith has got first figures in from Canning in Western Australia. Western Australia could be absolutely pivotal, or will be.
They're both from Canning, where on paper it's not in the ballpark for us, but because of Alana McTiernan, then it is.
Well, so what is the seat now?
It's about 4.4, nearly 4.5 away from us.
Right.
But Carrigallen District Hall, it's a small booth, about 260, a 9% swing to us. And then North Dandalup Primary School, 400 votes, or 350 votes, a swing of 3% to us.
Now, do you read anything into that?
Well, the movement in Canning is our way in those small booths. But Alana's chance is in the big booths in Armidale, where she was the state member and where the Labor vote is. But I think what we will see is a swing to Labor in Canning because of her credentials and standing. The question is, will it be big enough to knock off Don Randall?
OK, now we've had Adam Bant standing patiently by in Melbourne. Adam Bant, how are you feeling right now?
Well, it's a pretty happy feeling here, as you'd imagine. We've run a pretty positive campaign based around some really core values of compassion and sustainability and equality, and the feeling in the room here is pretty amazing.
So, what do you bring it down to? I mean, we've been on cue. We've been speculating tonight that the climate change policies of the government, the U-turn over the ETS, has played absolutely into your hands. I don't imagine you'd dispute that.
Oh, well, look, the government has chosen to delay action on climate change, and the coalition is in denial about it. And we've run a campaign that says that we need to take urgent action. We're facing a climate emergency. The scientists are telling us we've really got 10 years to start to turn it around, and we took that to people in Melbourne, and I think people in Melbourne have responded.
But the irony there, of course, is that you say urgent action needs to be taken to save the planet, but the Greens in the Senate actually voted the ETS down.
Well, we've always been pretty clear that we will support a scheme that is actually going to reduce emissions. One of the things, the case that we made to the electorate was that Labor's CPRS wouldn't have seen emissions reduced until 2035. And I think today people in Melbourne have delivered a pretty resounding verdict on what Labor and Liberal cooked up as their scheme to deal with climate change. And now we're opening up a new chapter where we've got a really exciting prospect in Parliament to take the kind of action that the country and the planet needs.
How different a situation might it have been if Lindsay Tanner had stayed on to contest the seat?
Well, he certainly had significant respect, and I'd be a rich man if I had $1 for every time someone told me that they liked what I stood for, but they thought Lindsay Tanner was good. And he's got, he had quite a strong following, and I respect him as a local member. So it certainly did help, but the against that, you know, there were a number of factors in play. We had Julia Gillard taking over as Prime Minister, and also the potential tightness of the election. So I don't think one can point to any one factor. I mean, we ran a positive campaign based on getting hundreds of volunteers out, door-knocking, leafleting over the best part of a year. And it's great to see that grassroots politics pays off, and I think it's really engaged people in the electorate.
Well, it does look now as if we are heading for a hung parliament. Neither of my panellists from the Liberal and Labor Party can see a clear path to majority government for either of them. In that event, you've made plain that that you would support Labor in any issue of who governs. That's correct?
Yeah, look, I've made some statements about that in the past, and I stand by those, but I'm not thinking about that tonight. I mean, we've got the whole electorate, the whole country result to come in yet, and I think over the coming days we'll see what happens, and that'll be the time to think about it. Tonight's the time for us here and all the fantastic supporters who've put in a lot of work over a year to celebrate a really hard-fought and well-earned victory and have a good night celebration.
And we're told that Kevin Rudd is about to make an appearance, but I'll just have one more question for you, and that is, have you heard the possibility that Andrew Wilkie might be joining you in the Parliament for the seat of Denison as an independent, but of course he's a former Green?
Well, the results, from what I've been told, are looking close in a couple of seats in Grainler and perhaps in Denison as well. And that's really exciting that the Green vote is on the rise, and I think increasingly Greens values are now mainstream values, and we're now taking our place in the floor of the National Parliament in the House of Representatives.
Adam Bandt, thanks very much for talking with us, and it's not yet so clear-cut that we can say congratulations, but it looks that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry.
Now, we're going to continue our seat run while we wait, but as I said, it sounds like Kevin Rudd is about to make an appearance in his seat of Griffith. We're going to look at the seat of, and there we've got some pictures, if we can go to those. Can we cut to our pictures of Kevin Rudd? We've got no sound from there yet, but he's about to speak, and as I said, this is a man who's been a part of an amazing saga.
You can talk to him about taking orders. Allocation preferences. Eldest son Nicholas is here.
Yep, they're just going through introductions, but we should contemplate the fact that this man took Labor to power in 2007 with one of the biggest swings for Labor in history, a swing of 5.4%. Swept Queensland with swings in some seats of 10%, 12%. He then enjoyed an amazing run of popularity as Prime Minister for much of his 2.5 years in the job, 2 years and 7 or 8 months in the job. Record popularity for some time. Had he been able to sustain that, he could have increased the majority substantially. He's about to speak now.
It's on sale.
No. I'm not quite sure exactly at what stage this is at, and I might just come back to our panel here for a moment while we're waiting, and as soon as it looks like he's about to speak, we'll cross to him. Stephen Smith, you must still have run questions through your mind about what happened. And whether it really should have happened, whether the actions by the Labor Party were premature. Kevin Rudd's about to speak.
If you try to talk in my ear, I can't hear you.
Before I make remarks about our election today, for all Australians and for those here in this room tonight, let us remember grieving families for those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan. These are the courageous sons of Australia. Let us never forget them or their families. Members of our local community, members of the great Australian Labor Party. Today, right across our nation, we have had hundreds of candidates and members, thousands of our party members, tens of thousands of our members and supporters out there in the field of battle, standing for the cause of Labor as we have stood for 100 years. You, here in this room, and all of them across Australia, are the standard bearers of our movement. Standard bearers for the values for which we have stood for more than a century. Values of a fair go for all. Values of decency and compassion for those who need a helping hand. And values of building our great nation, Australia. Values for which we have stood since the first federal election was held in 1901. I would salute each and every one of those standard bearers across our nation today. Standard bearers who have stood in the line of battle and have seen members fall and have seen candidates doing it tough, really tough. I say to each and every one of them that they do our movement proud, and let us stand by them. I would like to thank the good people of Griffith. This is a wonderful community, and I am proud once again to be able to represent it in the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia. I thank the good people of Griffith. This is a wonderful community. The people who represent the PNFs, the PNCs, the local sporting groups, who I've got to know now over a decade and a half and more, they are the heart and soul of our community, and their type makes up the heart and soul of Australia. I thank them for the honour of representing them in our Parliament. Friends, my scrutineers tell us that in this electorate of Griffith, in what has been a hard election, we have taken a swing against us of between 1% and 2%. I'm told also by our scrutineers that the Liberals have suffered a primary vote swing against them of 1%.
Now, we're cutting away from Kevin Rudd at this point because it would seem that he's talking very much about issues in the seat of Griffith and very much to his Griffith constituency, and it could go on for some time. And I'm not sure whether at any point he's going to turn his attention to the national picture and some of those questions that might be running through all our minds. But if he says anything of a national nature, we will record it and come back to it. But in the meantime, we've got some interesting things continuing to happen in any number of seats, and we've got our first figures coming in from Western Australia. But we're going to quickly look at the seat of Macquarie in New South Wales. Very much in play. This was Bob Davis's seat. He's retired. ALP margin only 0.3%. With 60% of the vote counted, this is very much in doubt.
Yeah, well, I'd given this away early in the evening, and at this stage, it's back in the doubtful column. Louise Marcus is well ahead there. Susan Templeman well behind on first preferences. Big vote for the Greens. But you do need to know where this electorate has got two completely different ends, one which was in Macquarie and one which was in Greenway, and I'm having some difficulty working out exactly where some of these booths are. There's a lot of booths from the Blue Mountains yet to come in, and I'm not sure what that effect that has, but we're seeing a 0.8% swing. Louise Marcus is ahead on 50.5 is our current prediction. She's ahead. We're not giving that seat away, so Macquarie remains in doubt.
OK, we're going to take a look at another very doubtful, well, it was a doubtful seat, but not anymore. This is the seat of Latrobe. Melbourne's outer east and southeast was held by Jason Woods since 2004 for the Liberals. Was a margin of 0.5%. We've now got 72% of the vote counted. Slight swing to the ABC and to the ALP. And that's the second time I've done this in 10 years. I wish those. I wish those letters weren't so similar.
Well, just to make you feel better, this is the gentleman who became an international, worldwide YouTube hit for talking about genetically modified orgasms in the Parliament. Anyway.
Not going to make quite the same parallel.
No. Jason Wood's ahead on the first preferences vote. There's quite a vote there for the Greens on 12.5%. We have a preference count in 42 of the 48 booths, and what's to come is mainly pre-poll voting centres. And at this stage, there's a 1.4% swing to the Labor Party. We've got it marked down as a Labor Party gain at this stage. Labor is far enough ahead on this predicted number to say that Laura Smith may go on to win that seat as a lawyer. I think there'll be a fair bit more counting in that, and he is the sitting member.
And he is exactly the sitting member of that.
Okay, now there's also a remarkable story to be told in the seat of Robertson, because this is in the state of New South Wales on the Central Coast, takes in Gosford. And this is in the state which has swung solidly against Labor. Very marginal seat for Labor, 0.1%. They lost their sitting member, but there's been a 1.1% swing to Labor.
This looks like a seat where the loss of the sitting member factor has helped the Labor Party. Deborah O'Neill was pre-selected, defeating Belinda Neal, the Labor Party member, who of course had a series of problems during the last term of Parliament. Deborah O'Neill is behind there on the first preferences, but a substantial vote there with the Greens. We have a preference count in 44 of the 50 booths. It's a swing of 1.1% to Labor. That won't be turned around. The Labor Party will go on to win Robertson.
Okay, now, Stephen, you're on. This is the man here who's got. Show us, come on. He's got one phone to his ear and he's working the BlackBerry with the thumb. Are you learning anything?
Just hang on. Just early results in Perth, including my own seat. Still early results in Canning, but a swing our way. Hasluck, one small booth, but a swing of less than 1%, which is a good sign. Swan, a small booth, but a swing away from us. In my own seat, in a couple of small booths, there's a drop in our primary vote and increased vote for the Greens. A lot of that is coming back. But in a couple of small booths, which are to my west, so near Stirling, there's a 3 or a 4% swing against us to PP. That doesn't augur well for Stirling, but what I need is to get a booth in my northeast to make some parallels or some predictions in terms of Cowan and also Hasluck. But on the very small stuff that's in so far, swing against us in Hasluck, but at this stage slow enough to sustain, but very early days, and Canning too hard to tell whether the swing is big enough to dislodge the member. I've also always thought the swing against me in Perth will be bigger, I think, than in the marginal seats. I think we'll have a bigger swing against us in Freo, Brand and Perth than we will in the marginals because of the tight sort of competition and contest in those marginal seats.
What's your gut feeling? If you were just pretend for a moment that you're actually sitting back in Perth.
Gut feeling? Maybe hang on in Hasluck, fall short in Swan, and maybe jag Canning.
Can I make a prediction? It's currently looking like Labor 73, Coalition 72, 1 Green and 4 Independents.
And are you counting Denison as one of the 4 independents?
Yep.
And
will make for a very interesting.
Which seats in the West have you got in that mix?
That's assuming not much change in Western Australia.
Well, any change?
If the Labor lost the seat, say they lost Swan, which is a possibility. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about with 73, 74. I can't see Labor unless some of those seats like Greenway and Lindsay, the change in the postal vote pushes Labor back in front in some of those seats. I can't see Labor getting to 76, but equally, I can't see the Coalition getting to 76 at the moment. They're still behind.
We are heading for a hung parliament, and a very unpredictable hung parliament, because we've got in play the possibility not only of a new Greens member for the seat of Melbourne, but a new independent in the seat of Denison in Tasmania, with a background in Green politics, and a big question mark about where Andrew Wilkie would sit in any discussion about who he'd support for government. And then you've got the other 3 independents who, although they have conservative backgrounds, would not automatically go into the Conservative camp. This is a very line ball situation for both major parties after a fascinating campaign. I know a lot of Australians were frustrated by it and expressed their displeasure at the quality of debate, but nonetheless it's been a fascinating campaign.
And if we are able to be objective about it, a fascinating night.
And at this stage, the result in Grayndler is still in doubt. Anthony Albanese.
This is Grayndler, which traditionally has been a safe Labor seat in Sydney's inner west, held by Anthony Albanese, the Minister for Infrastructure in the Rudd, then Gillard government.
The preference count being conducted by the Electoral Commission tonight is between Labor and Liberal, and the Labor and Liberal between Labor and Liberal. The Liberal and Green candidates are swapping second and third.
What's Albo's primary vote?
He will win. He's got 46.8.
He'll win on that. Yeah, he's got to slip below 42, 41 to be in danger. 45, 46 primary, he'll win that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we've got Tony Jones. We're going to cross to Tony Jones on the tally room floor with Concetta Fioranti-Wells, Liberal Senator for New South Wales, and Paul Howes of the AWU.
And Paul Howes, I just want you to contemplate this. Julia Gillard trying to cobble together a majority that includes a Green MP in Melbourne and potentially Andrew Wilkie, the former Green whistleblower, who looks like that he might take Denison. What does that kind of government look like, and what sort of pressure is there going to be on the Prime Minister?
Well, it's an amazing result if that's the case. I mean, look, the last figures I saw in Denison, there was only 100 votes between the Liberal candidate and Andrew Wilkie. If the Liberal candidate overtakes Andrew Wilkie, then that would be well, presumably a pretty safe retain for Labor. I don't think we could actually put that firmly in as an Andrew Wilkie win.
But just contemplate this strange hung parliament that we look like we're headed for, and how do you see Labor creating a majority out of this cobbled together group of independents, Greens and a former Green, potentially?
Well, Adam Bant's already said how he would, which party he would support, and clearly he would support the Labor Party. In terms of Andrew Wilkie, you'd presume that he'd be more likely to swing towards Labor than the coalition. But the three independents, well, four independents possibly now, but the three independents, Rob Oakeshott, Bob Katter and Tony Windsor. Tony Windsor's obviously got experience in dealing with hung parliaments when he was a member of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly in the early 90s when Bob Carr had a minority government. It'd be interesting to see how he goes.
But what I'm talking about here is how would it change the flavour of the government? How would it change it philosophically? Have that kind of pressure, and when you add to that the very strong potential of having the Greens controlling the Senate as well?
Well, this will not be politics like we've ever seen before in the National Parliament. This is a game changer tonight. We are seeing a very unusual result, very good for Labor in some states and terrible for Labor in others, and just plain bizarre in places like Tasmania. All eyes, I think, are on WA at the moment. If Labor does well in Hasluck and Swan, very positive early signs coming out of Canning. That could change the game, but certainly I think if you were a betting man, you'd bet right now on a hung parliament.
All right, Connie Fioranti-Wells, give us your sort of take on what this strange new world might look like.
Well, first of all, before I do, can I just say Bennelong, I've just been told, has definitely been won by the coalition. I'm very, very pleased about that. But can I just say, surely, Paul, you must have contemplated, I mean, the fact that you did this deal with the Greens, which both Bob Brown and Julia Gillard have been at pains to deny. You must have contemplated in that deal that we could see a further lurch to the left. And so I think what this make-up would do is certainly see Australia lurching much further to the left.
And how from your point of view, how ironic would that be, given Tony Abbott's philosophical position and how close he is already to forming a government himself, potentially?
Well, of course, what we will see is that we'll certainly get a carbon tax, we'll certainly get a mining tax. Australia will change very much in that way. But that is the reality of politics, if that's what's dished up. But
sounded pretty good to me.
Well, it's certainly what I will say.
Can I just hear Paul
I was just going to say one thing that is likely to happen. The soap opera that the Labor Party has now become will certainly very much continue, because the recriminations, I think, that will start in the Labor Party will be severe. I think, what did Dean Miguel say the other day about factions and...
Dean Miles not a member of the Labor Party, and he ain't coming back. He ain't coming back.
Well, that's interesting, Paul. You obviously have a lot of sway to be able to make that comment.
Can I just jump in and ask, Paul, that is a good point that's being made. We saw Graham Richardson this morning basically doing a damage control piece in The Australian, suggesting that if the knives are to be wielded at any time in the Labor Party, they should be wielded in the direction of those in Kevin Rudd's camp, who he blames for giving away so much of the advantage during the campaign with the leaks.
Tony, it is 9:10. I have not given up hope that Labor will not be able to form a government, and I don't think anyone in the Labor Party right now is thinking about recriminations or anything along those lines. This was always going to be a tough election. We saw that every first-term government has always struggled to maintain their majority once they go face the polls. We saw that in '98 with Howard. We saw it in '84 with Hawke. This was always going to go down to the wire. It looks like all eyes are on WA at the moment. But if you look at the primary vote of the Greens and you look at the primary vote of the Labor Party, definitely Australia has voted left of centre tonight. That is a good victory. Well, that is a big defeat for the Liberal Party that they haven't been able to convince the majority of Australians to support.
So, you were in a winning position. I mean, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, and here you are, you're at this point. You have squandered the goodwill of the Australian public. You have politically assassinated a leader. 5 weeks ago, you'd lost your way.
Okay. I'd like to get you to respond to that, but you might have to wait because we're going to have to leave you both there, and you can continue that debate off camera for a little while. And we'll just throw back to Kerry.
And in a situation... And in a situation where this nation is on a knife edge in terms of the future government of this country and the increasing likelihood of a hung parliament, this is a good time, as good a time as any, to take a look at the national picture, the swing across the nation, and with 64% of the vote counted, you're looking at two figures that tell the story. There's been a 3% swing nationally against Labor towards the Liberals. Labor has 49.7% of the two-party preferred vote. The Liberal coalition, Liberal National Coalition, 50.3%. And we're going to cross to Lee Sales to take a closer look at how that breaks down.
Thanks, Kerry. To recap, for viewers who might be joining us, at this stage neither Labor nor the Coalition can find the numbers to form a majority government. There's been a very big swing against Labor in Queensland and a substantial but not quite so large anti-Labor swing in New South Wales. In other states, though, things are going a little bit better for Labor. Western Australian results are just starting to come in. Let's have a look at how the seats are playing at the moment. Labor has 71 seats. They have lost 11 seats. The Coalition with 66 seats, having picked up 9. The Greens have 1 seat that we were hearing about earlier in Melbourne, and the others and independents, minor parties, have 4. There's a gain of 1 that we're counting there in Tasmania. Let's take a look at the primary vote. We can see Labor sitting on 38.1% of the primary vote, the Coalition on 43.7%, the Greens at about 11.6%, and minor parties and others at about 6.6%. How does that compare to 2007? Let's take a look at the swings. Labor is experiencing a 5.3% swing against it. The Coalition, a 1.5% swing in its favour. The Greens would be pleased with a 3.9% swing to them, allowing them to pick up, as I said, that seat in Melbourne. And the minor parties and independents, 0.1% swing away from them. The chamber graphic, how is it looking at this time of the night? Seats 1, Labor 71, the Coalition 66. The Greens now have 1 seat in the House of Representatives, and independents 4. We're going to have 4 in the House of Reps. That's with about 65% of the vote counted. If we switch to have a look at the likely graphic, the seats that we factor in that the parties are expected to hold on to, the ALP 71, the Coalition 68, the Greens 1, independents and others 4. As we've been hearing, if Labor wants to make up its losses in Queensland and New South Wales, it needs to pick up seats in South Australia and Victoria. And the results in those states are certainly different to the numbers those states are certainly different to the numbers we've been seeing out of Queensland and New South Wales. Let's have a quick whip around some of the Victorian seats. Corangamite, with about 70% of the vote counted there, it looks like Labor is going to retain that seat. I think there was just the tiniest swing to Labor there, which isn't even showing up on our computer, but Darren Cheeseman will hold on to that. The seat of Aston, where Chris Pearce, the sitting Liberal MP, is retiring. There's been a 3.2% swing to Labor there. Not enough for Labor to win the seat. It looks like Alan Tudge, who's succeeding Chris Pearce, he's a lawyer, will hold on to that seat for the Liberal Party. In McEwen, Fran Bailey, the sitting Liberal MP, is retiring. If we've got the McEwen graphic. She's retiring. It's a region badly affected by the Black Saturday bushfires, and it looks like Labor is going to pick up that seat with a 5.5% swing to the ALP. This is what I'm talking about the results in Victoria being very different to those in Queensland and New South Wales. Latrobe, a seat in Melbourne's outer east. There's another small swing there to Labor, a 1.4% swing. Our computer is predicting that Laura Smythe will hold on to that seat. That's with almost 3/4 of the vote counted there. Now, South Australia has seen a big swing to the Greens, and of course on preferences that will go back to Labor. So if we needed more evidence, it's very much a state-by-state, seat-by-seat election, and of course the closeness of everything only whets the appetite to see some more numbers out of Western Australia.
State by state and seat by seat, that's certainly the case, but the state that is now coming into play and that everyone is going to be watching over the next half hour to hour, possibly longer, is Western Australia. Anthony, we've got, I'm not quite sure how much we've got of the vote counted there yet, but...
What we're seeing overall in Western Australia is a swing of 1.7% to the Liberals in Western Australia. These are 14%. There's a fair number of votes from places like O'Connor and Durack outside of Perth at this stage, but that's indicating that Labor might lose seats. So let's have a look at some of the individual electorates.
Okay, we're going to start with the seat of Hasluck. This is in eastern Perth. This was picked up by Sharon Jackson for the Labor Party in 2007. It's on a margin of 0.8%, and we've got 10.6% of the vote counted. This is a critical seat.
It could well be a critical result for this election. This is a seat Labor desperately needs to hang on to. Ken Wyatt, if elected, would be the first Indigenous member of the House of Representatives. Sharon Jackson was first elected in 2001, lost in 2004, and has been re-elected in 2007. We're factoring in that's only one booth, unfortunately, for that preference count, indicating a 0.4% swing to the Liberal Party. But on the primary votes I've got, there's no swing to the Liberals on the primary votes, which is a good first set of results for Labor. We can't call Hasluck. We'll be coming to back to that a bit through the night, but we haven't got any better figures on Hasluck. Hasluck we'll be coming back to.
Okay, now the seat of Swan, another critical seat. This has a sitting Liberal member in Steve Irons, but it's been redistributed and it's now on paper a Labor seat with a margin of 0.3%. Now we've had 9.2% of the vote counted and we've got a different story.
Yeah, this is a seat that if Steve Irons has done his work, he should be able to do well in the areas added to the electorate. He's ahead on the first preference votes. He's got a slight increase in his first preference vote. Labor's vote's down about 4% on the first preference vote. That's translating into a 2.4% swing to the Liberals. At this stage, we haven't got enough of a count to give that seat away, but Steve Irons is ahead at this stage, which is where he'd want to be.
Okay, the seat of Stirling in Perth's northern suburbs. This is held by Michael Keenan since 2004. It's on a 1.3% margin for the Liberal Nats, with 22% of the vote counted.
And I'm seeing a very strange swing. Michael Keenan's well ahead on these first preference votes, and you've got to really look where these figures come from. Doubleview, Karrinyup, Yokine, Balcatta, Joondalup. We haven't got any of the booths from east of the Mitchell Freeway there yet. And we're factoring in at this stage, when we look at the preferences, a swing of 5% to Labor.
That can't be right.
It is an electorate with two distinct ends.
Yeah, but there's something. We need to come back to that. There's something not quite right.
Okay, so big question mark about those figures.
Those figures have not been right for a while. So as I've said, upset victory. So I'm not quite sure that's correct.
Okay, we'll have a very quick look at Perth. Now, this is Stephen Smith's own seat. He's held it since 1993. The inner suburbs of Perth, he had a margin of 7.9%. Stephen, you've lost 2%. You've lost 2% of your vote.
Well, I thought about 1 to 2%. It might end up being a bit bigger than that. There've been 4 to 5% swings against me to my west, which is the Stirling border. What really need to see is a big booth in the northeast, because that abuts Hasluck in Beechborough. That would give us a good guide to Hasluck. But,
just very quickly, before we move on, very quickly, what did you make of the Hasluck figures?
If I had to snap now, I'd say that young Tim Hammond has done very well in Swan, but not quite got there. That Jackson would just hang on, a couple of hundred, 300-400 votes in Hasluck, and Alana has done very well in Canning, but might just fall short. But that's, if I had to snap now, I don't want to snap now. I'm very encouraged by Hasluck because she's a good local member. So what we need to see in Hasluck is a big booth in from Midland, which is not yet in.
Okay, now we're going to take a quick look at the seat of... No?
No, we'll continue.
You're going to talk through Perth.
We have to go through
right?
Perth before
quickly,
we can do this next. Bennelong, Stephen Smith, well ahead there in Perth, well, just ahead in Perth. 16% with the Greens, which we believe will get Stephen well over the line. If you look at the preferences here, a 2% swing to the Liberal Party. But Stephen, this is one of the safest seats for Labor in Western Australia. So Stephen Smith, the Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister, has been returned as the member for Perth.
He wants one quick last word.
The preference flow has been very strong, so that's a good sign, particularly for Swan, but also for parts of Hasluck, which go up into the hills.
The preference flow strong for you?
From the Greens, yeah.
Okay. We're going to take a look at the seat of Bennelong because we've got Maxine McHugh standing by. This is Sydney's northwest suburbs. Maxine won this in 2007 as a margin of 1.4%, but she's lost the seat.
Yeah, the figures, it's quite clear-cut in the end. John Alexander well ahead when we look at the percentages. He's got 49% of the vote, Labor with Maxine McHugh 37. The Greens have got 7.8, so they haven't done quite well in that electorate. When you factor in the preferences and where the booths are from, it's a 5.2% swing, a Liberal gain, and John Alexander, former professional tennis player and television commentator, is a new member for Bennelong.
And Maxine McHugh joins me now from Bennelong. Maxine, you've got a place in history as the second Australian to take a seat from a Prime Minister, but again, you've lasted one term. How are you feeling about this right now?
Not a good night, Kerry, and in the end we could not withstand this kind of swing. As you've just said, I was on 1.4%. And it was very interesting. We had 11 candidates on the ballot. I'm told actually that all candidates, the vote has really gone everywhere. Christian Democrats got higher votes in particular booths, things like this. We have also had a very high informal vote in some areas, which actually suggests a pox on both your houses.
Now, how do you read it? How do you read it, considering the campaign that you've watched being run across the nation while you've conducted your campaign within Bennelong? What do you have to say about the nature of the national campaign, the quality of the national campaign, and how it's affected you?
Kerry, there are some very big questions for the Labor Party, given what has happened tonight. We shouldn't be on a knife edge tonight, and we shouldn't be losing colleagues all over the country. I couldn't help but think today, as I was out on booths that I was on in 2007, the difference between the hope and the joy and the great expectations that we generated 3 years ago, and I guess the sullenness among many voters. I think we have been a good government, but clearly not good enough. Now, your question was about the national campaign. I would argue that I'd still be the member for Bennelong tonight if we had run the same kind of professional, targeted, clear, disciplined campaign that we ran in 2007. Now, clearly, this national campaign has left a lot to be desired.
There was one moment in the campaign when Julia Gillard announced that Labor would commit to $2.5 billion in funding for the Parramatta to Epping railway line, Epping in your electorate, and there was a great deal of scepticism, even cynicism about that pledge, given that it was first promised by Bob Carr back in 1998. Now, it's been suggested that rather than helping you in your seat, it actually counted against you. What do you think?
I think you may be right there. There was a lot of cynicism, although I'd have to say to you, Kerry, I welcome that announcement. We all know that is the missing link. We have the Chatswood to Epping link, which is, a terrific piece of infrastructure, and of course, the rest of the line has to be complete. Every Chamber of Commerce in this area, they all come together under the Ryde Business Forum, they have welcomed this and said it's much needed infrastructure. But you are right. I think that given the on-again, off-again nature of transport commitments in this city, we are battling uphill to convince people of the credibility of that commitment.
Now, Kevin Rudd persuaded you to run for this seat in the first place, and I imagine your memories of that night will be etched in your mind for the rest of your life. But you were one of the few who stayed with Kevin Rudd at the end of his Prime Ministership. Do you think that there would have been a different outcome if Kevin Rudd had remained Prime Minister?
I don't know, Kerry, but clearly you cannot have the removal of a Labor leader and a Prime Minister and then 2 months later have an election and not have that play into the outcome. But if I could just give you an idea of what I think has happened nationally, a couple of things. I think our problems actually go back to last year when we never quite claimed victory over the global financial crisis. I think the singular achievement of the government has been the fact that we have a national unemployment rate of 5.3%. Everyone I know has got a job. Everyone in the suburbs around here is working. We kept the nation working. That's an extraordinary achievement, but that was not the central message of our campaign. It should have been built all around jobs. Now, I know that Julia Gillard was talking about jobs all the time, but I have to say the clarity of that did not cut through in the same way as the clarity of the Liberal campaign. And I'll mention one other thing that was a huge factor here in Bennelong that goes to the heart of credibility. When we walked away from the prosecution of the case of the CPRS, that cut through here immediately, and not just among Green voters. People saw it as a core belief issue. They said, well, look, you argued for this. You said it was the most important thing. And if you're going to walk away from that, what else are you going to walk away from? So I have to say the disappointment with the kind of government that we said we would be, I think has been acute.
Any regrets about doing all this, Maxine McHugh?
No, none. Absolutely none, Kerry. No, come on. This is, look, it's, I made a very clear decision. I wanted to play a role in public life. And it was, actually, I'll just correct you on a point of history there. It was my decision to run in Bennelong. And it was, my bloke, Bob Hogg, it was Bob's idea. I actually took this idea to Kevin. I said, Kevin, I'm prepared to run in Bennelong if you will back me. So, no, I knew what I was in for, and I just thought it was important to run for a marginal seat. I had easier options before me, I can tell you. But no, it's been a privilege and a joy, and I'm no longer the member, and I'm disappointed about that. Many of my supporters are shattered. But no, I'd do it again tomorrow. I've built up a lot of intense relationships here, and that won't change. I can walk out my door tomorrow in Epping and hold my head high with my neighbours and all the community groups that I've done a lot of work with over the last 3 years.
Maxine McHugh, thank you very much for sharing your candour. For sharing your candour with us at this time.
And they did it with me.
Maxine, thanks very much for talking with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you, Kerry. Thanks, Kerry.
Yes, Nick mentioned.
I think the Labor bloodletting has begun. That reminded me of Cheryl Curnow in 1998 when we were sitting here and Cheryl dumped on the Labor Party for putting her in the wrong seat. I think there was a lot of criticism there of the Labor Party, of the dumping of Kevin Rudd, of not pursuing the CPRS. I think you're going to see now that I think it's quite clear Labor will not get a majority of seats tonight. And I think you're going to see a lot of Labor bloodletting. That's just the start of it.
Maybe I'm speaking personally, since Maxine is a former colleague. Sure. I don't think I'd make a direct comparison with what you were referring to before, to Cheryl Kernow's.
Wasn't quite the dummy spit of Cheryl's, but nevertheless, some very pointed and personal criticism of the Labor Party from me. I feel sorry for her. Being a oncer is a terrible thing in politics, and I credit her for running for a marginal seat, and I think she has been, her career has been destroyed.
And defeating the second most successful Prime Minister in Australian history.
Indeed. And, but her career has been destroyed by the faceless men of the Labor Party in knifing an elected Prime Minister.
Stephen Smith, were you conveniently on your phones then? You must have taken in some of what Maxine said, and she's thought about this.
Well, Maxine is entitled to be disappointed. I mean, she played a significant role in our victory. She's a good person and she was a very good local member, so she's entitled to be disappointed. Firstly. Secondly, I was on the phone trying to make judgments about what's occurring in the West.
Yeah.
You know, and people will ask, well, if Kevin had remained leader, could we have won? Now, obviously, my most direct experience is in the West, and currently we're in the hunt for Swan and Canning and Hasluck. We may fall under in two of those three, but I know that the very strong feedback that I was getting in the West was that if the change had not been made, that tonight I would be talking to you in the following terms, which is, are we holding on to Fremantle as the only seat that Labor will hold in the West, as we did in 1975 and 1977? Such was the way in which the Western Australian community had closed its mind to Kevin.
And what about other parts of Australia?
Exactly.
Well, my own judgment, and clearly the judgment of the caucus, was that yes, there was a closing of the mind. I mean, I think the thing which caused real difficulty for Kevin was the way in which the decision to defer implementation of emissions trading was presented. I think that was a real blow to his standing, and that in very many respects was the start of the view which became a very strong view in the caucus, that we had to make a change.
But was that a decision that Kevin Rudd made on his own? Or was it a decision that Julia Gillard made with him? There's even a suggestion that it was others who thrust that decision upon him, that he was not leading that decision.
And indeed, that Julia was very much supportive of that, the way that was handled.
You can rerun the campaign if you like, Nick, you know, but we've got a position tonight where you can't find 76 seats, I can't find 76 seats. I'm still trying to find how many seats we've got in the West, so you know, I'm very happy for you to rerun the campaign with the sloganeering, that's fine. You know, people will ask the question, you know, could Kevin have won? You know, after a lot of thinking about this, my own judgment is no. What Julia at least provided was the opportunity to be a change agent. Now, it may well be that was maximised in the West because of Kevin's deep association with the mining tax. But in the end, I mean, I take my responsibility as a Cabinet Minister for our performance and the judgments that we made. But in the end, the primary responsibility, of course, goes to the leader, whether the leader is Kevin, whether the leader is Julia, whether in Nick's case the leader is Tony or Brendan or Malcolm.
But in that period where it was, you were coming to the view that the government had lost its way or was losing its way, obviously within the Cabinet, those closest to Kevin Rudd, those most concerned, those most senior, surely must have been going to him and endeavouring to talk to him. Now, was he just not listening? Why wasn't it possible to have him lead you back to safe ground? Was he not listening?
I think there were really two aspects to it. One was the very dire circumstances that we found ourselves in, firstly, and secondly, and then a lack of confidence that Kevin was able to lead us out of it. I think the dire political circumstances we found ourselves in, plus a lack of confidence that he could do that job, saw the shift occur. But this was not a decision that anyone took lightly. This was, you know, difficult decisions. But my own instinct is that if we had gone to the poll with Kevin as leader, then Nick would be finding his 76 seats.
Okay, and we've actually got Wayne Swan standing by. Wayne, I'll ask you to be patient for a second because Anthony's got something.
We had a problem with the figures being fed to us by Sterling, so I've turned off the comparison of polling booths. That's switched it round, and for the first time tonight, I've got the coalition with more seats than Labor, 73 to 72. So I'll let you talk to Wayne Swan, but I just thought I'd throw that point up now.
Okay, Wayne Swan, I'm not sure whether you heard what Maxine McHugh has had to say. You've heard what Stephen Smith has had to say. Your comments?
I haven't heard what Maxine McHugh has had to say, and I did hear some of what Steve has had to say. But what I do want to do tonight is to pay tribute to the leadership of Julia Gillard, the very strong and inspiring leadership of Julia Gillard in very difficult circumstances.
What Maxine McHugh was saying was that she felt that from her own electors that the going back on the ETS was a very big turning point. She felt that the national campaign was not focused. She thought that Labor had failed to get its message across about what it had achieved with regard to its actions on the global financial crisis.
Well, certainly it's been a very difficult campaign, and you can make a whole range of criticisms. I don't intend to run through those tonight. I'll leave that up to the commentators. But the fact is that we did find ourselves, as Steve Smith was saying, in very difficult circumstances that we've had from the start of the year. The fact that we're still competitive at the moment, I think, is testament to the leadership of Julia Gillard. There's no doubt it's a very close result, and there will be plenty of time for analysis and to run through and rake over all of those issues. But I can't do that tonight.
So how do you explain the vote against Labor in Queensland?
Well, Queensland, Kerry, as you well know, as a Queenslander, is extremely volatile, and all of my political life it has always been a volatile electorate here, particularly in federal elections. The fact is, at the last federal election, we won a swag of seats here, and for some time now, those seats have been at risk. And what we've seen is some of them have fallen tonight, but not all of them.
Now, the way it's looking, there seems little doubt that you are facing a hung parliament. And the question then comes into play is who is going to be able to form minority government. Anthony Green is just saying to me that from looking at the figures that are available now from the West, for the first time tonight, he's calling 73 seats for the coalition and 72 for Labor. There's also the possibility that you may have a perhaps Green-oriented independent in Tasmania in place of one of the Labor seats. Do you have a view on the circumstances that should govern how minority government is formed?
Kerry, I can't speculate about that tonight. I don't know whether that is going to eventuate or not. I think we are just going to have to wait until we see what the figures look like over the next day or two. I think it would be the wrong thing to do to be speculating about that. I don't intend to.
Do you acknowledge that it's virtually impossible now for Labor to form government in its own right?
Well, I think there are a lot of very close seats out there. We've got a lot of postal votes. There's been very big pre-poll. I think we've got to wait a few days until we go through those results. You see, in some of those seats that we won in Queensland in the last federal election, we didn't know the outcome of those seats, the final outcome, in some cases for days and in some cases for weeks. So it's very close. I think it's just too early to come to that conclusion.
Okay, well, Wayne Swan, thanks for making the time. I know it's been a very long campaign for you and no doubt a long day, but thanks for giving us the time.
Thanks very much.
Now, we're just going to cross down to Tony Jones. Just before we do, Anthony, you want to talk about the Senate?
Just very briefly, the Liberals have lost a seat to the Greens, lost a seat in Tasmania, so that's a loss. They'll lose a seat.
Sorry, Labor has lost.
Coalition has lost
this is the Senate we're talking about.
Senate. The Liberals have lost a Senate seat in Tasmania, and they'll lose a Senate seat in Queensland, which means that even if they form government, there will be some difficulty. But it looks like the Greens have taken a seat off Labor in Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales, and Stephen Fielding has been defeated in Victoria.
Yeah. So what does that do for the makeup of the Parliament? Does it definitely deliver the balance of power to the Greens?
The Greens were always going to get the balance of power in this Senate, but it does mean if the coalition does win, the Greens will still have the balance of power.
But we now have the strange situation where the old Senate will sit there for another 11 months.
But it does look like the Liberals will hold the seat in the ACT because the vote has hovered around 33.
Kerry, I'd just point out quickly, with around 20% of the vote counted in Hasluck and Swan, we are ahead in both those seats, and they're both Labor on the figures. So that would give us 73 seats, and that's not counting Greenway and Lindsay. which could still come our way. They're absolutely line ball. So at this stage, I think we can be reasonably confident we are going to finish up with more seats than Labor and a higher two-party preferred vote than Labor. So if it is a hung parliament, they will be major factors when it comes to the final.
Can I just say on that I had a close look at the actual votes for Greenway, Lindsay and Corangamite, who've all come back to being quite close again. Yeah. That is basically the end of the night, I think, and it all factors in the idea that the postal vote went a particular way last time, and there isn't a sitting Liberal member in those seats this time.
True.
So if all of Labor, if you look at the raw votes, Labor is further ahead just on the raw votes than it does look like on the modelling. So that is why we will be waiting quite a while. And we don't know, it's rather hard to factor in the extra postal votes and the fact that the pre-polls have been counted on the night this time. So there's a number of things which affect the predicted models we traditionally use to call the election.
OK, now we're going to cross down to Tony Jones on the floor with Queensland Liberal Senator George Brandis and South Australian Labor Senator Penny Wong.
And before we come to the politics, and there's been quite a bit of politics recently with Maxine McHugh's speech and so on, George Brandis, what's your seat count at the moment? Because you were actually calling the coalition on 73 seats earlier.
Yes, I was, and I hear Nick Minchin is now saying the same thing. The way I assess it is this. The Labor Party appears to have lost a net 14 seats to the coalition. 1 seat Melbourne to the Green and 1 seat Denison to Andrew Wilkie, so total Labor losses of 16, which would take them to 72 seats. The coalition has won 14 seats net from the Labor Party. We've won 9 in Queensland, 4 in New South Wales. We appear to have lost 2 in Victoria. We are likely to win 2 in Western Australia, no change in South Australia, and to win 1 seat in the Northern Territory. We had 59 on the notionally in the old Parliament. We would, if we pick up those 14, that's 73 seats. So 73 for us, 72 to the Labor Party, and 5 independents or minor parties. But there's one important assumption that I'm making in that calculation favourable to the Labor Party. It assumes that 4 seats that are really too close to call, Corangamite in Victoria, Moreton in Queensland, and Lindsay and Greenway in New South Wales are all go to the Labor Party.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's pretty much what Anthony Green was saying, I think. Now, Penny Wong, politics now, because you've just heard Maxine McHugh make some pretty stringent criticisms. First of all, of the Labor campaign. It struck me that she was suggesting it wasn't such a great idea to go early, and secondly that it was run rather badly. If it had been run in a more professional and targeted way, it would have had a much better chance of winning.
Well, look, I actually didn't hear what Maxine was saying because I was elsewhere.
Well, she certainly said those things that I just quoted to you.
But obviously people will have their own views about this election, what we did well, what we didn't do well. I'm sure there'll be a lot of...
what are your views? That's why I've got you here tonight.
Well, first, I'd say that I think Julia personally ran an extraordinarily good campaign as leader in very, very tough circumstances. I think she was put under enormous pressure publicly. She obviously... we went into this election with a tough fight. It got tougher given some of the things that occurred during the election campaign. She certainly was put under a lot of scrutiny by the public and by the media, as she should be, as somebody seeking re-election as Prime Minister. But I thought she came through it really demonstrating her leadership credentials and her strengths.
Here's the other key criticism that Maxine McHugh made. We walked away from the CPRS, the emissions trading scheme. It was a core belief issue for many people who voted for Labor. We walked away from that and people asked, this is Maxine McHugh I'm quoting here, what else are we going to walk away from? So, I mean, you're there as the Climate Change Minister, you see these things happening. Was it in fact a huge mistake to walk away from the emissions trading scheme?
Oh, well, I think there's no doubt that was a controversial decision, and it's a decision where you've got some pretty strong views on either side, Tony. I mean, there are people who think that was the right thing to do, and there are people who think that was the wrong thing to do.
Did you think it was the right thing or the wrong thing?
I'm a member of the government. Yeah, I stand by the decision. Right or wrong, we stand by our decisions, and you make them at the time. People make them at the time with the best interest.
It sounds like you might have argued against it at the time,
well,
judging by what
you know, Tony, I don't do that. I don't talk about what happens inside cabinet or elsewhere. But I would say this. So I mean, there is no doubt there are a lot of people in this country who want action on climate change and who are deeply frustrated by the fact that because of what occurred last year, where you saw the Senate vote the legislation down, that we are where we are, that the political consensus has shattered, that Mr. Abbott believes that climate change science is absolute crap, and I think on the ABC earlier this week or last week suggested that the world was in fact cooling. There are a lot of people frustrated by that, and I can understand that frustration.
Okay, let me ask you this, because we don't have a huge amount of time, but how would you feel about recasting and rewriting environmental policy with the Greens? Since you may well have Greens and proto-Green colleagues, potentially, if you manage to cobble together a government, a minority government, if you manage to even do that, and you have the Greens controlling the Senate as well with the balance of power, would you welcome working with the Greens to go back over all these policies and maybe toughen them up?
We would always, in government, as we have been, seek to look to the national interest. Now, what we think is in the national interest may be different to what you or others in the media or some people in the Greens party think. But we know an issue like climate change is not resolved by simple solutions and slogans. It is a tough economic reform. That's why we went through the process we went through, and we understand there's no getting away from that tough economic reform.
All right, I'll just get a response from George Brandis to that.
Well, it's all very well to be saying this now, but going back to Maxine McHugh's remark, I think one of the important influences that completely changed public opinion in the early part of this year was when the Labor Party gave up on the CPRS, and I suspect against Penny's urging in Cabinet, I don't know that, but I suspect that, then they did communicate a message to the public that they stood for nothing. If they weren't prepared to stand by their most fundamental principle, the greatest moral challenge of our age, what did they stand for? So I think that's true. There were other factors as well, and I don't think you can assess the 2010 election, which is still in play. I mean, nobody even knows who's going to emerge as the government yet. But,
all right, it certainly is in play. We're going to go back to the people who can give us more detail on those seats. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, we had some surprising action in Tasmania in this election that we weren't quite expecting, and where Tasmania may deliver up an independent to the new parliament. But the seat of Bass in Tasmania, which takes in Launceston and the northeast, this was a seat that Labor held by only 1%. They had a retiring member in Jodie Campbell, and the new ALP candidate, Jeff Lyons, has retained the seat with 80% of the vote counted. Anthony?
And if we look at the figures, that 44%, Jeff Lyons is easily ahead on the first preferences with a substantial vote there for the Greens. And if Labor's ahead with such a high Green vote on the first preferences, you can tell the Labor's going to go and win the seat, and they've done that, and they've taken that seat to a comfortable buffer at this election, which is a darn sight safer than, I remember Warwick, what's his name? I forgot his name. The former member who lost by 40 votes.
Warwick Smith.
Warwick Smith. So it's been quite a remarkable turnaround. But Jeff Lyons,
a name like Smith.
Jeff Lyons is now the new member for Bass.
Say that again. And Jeff Lyons is standing by in his electorate. Jeff Lyons, this must be a bittersweet kind of victory for you, because on the one hand you enter the parliament, on the other hand Labor seats are crashing all over the country, and it may yet be, in fact seems more likely that there'd be a Liberal minority government than Labor. So how are you feeling?
I would prefer to be a Labor government. I still live in hope. It's certainly nice to win in Bass, but I think a Labor government would be the best government for Australia.
So can you explain why Tasmania did not swing to the Liberals in this election where there have been such dramatic swings in some other states?
I think the stimulus package has been well targeted in Tasmania. It's taken schools 20 and 30 years ahead of where they would be without the stimulus package. It's the broadband is a major issue here. No one in Tasmania wants a second-rate system, and the best system is the national broadband network. We can't believe that people of Australia don't realise that.
Has it taken you by surprise, as I imagine it's taken many others, that the seat of Denison may be lost to Labor and that Andrew Wilkie may have won it as an independent?
Yeah, that's a surprise, because I think the Parliament's potentially going to lose a good member, but it's because I just can't comprehend that one really. He's obviously done some work. He's worked hard enough, and the people of his electorate must think he's the man for the job.
Well, Geoff Lyons, congratulations for winning the seat. As I said, in very strange circumstances, everything is still on a knife edge, and at this stage you don't know who's going to form the government and where exactly you'll be sitting in the Parliament. But thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
No problem. Anytime, Kerry. Bye.
OK, we're going to continue our seat run, and we're going to look at the new seat of McMahon in Sydney's West, and this is held by Chris Bowen, one of the up-and-comers in the Labor Party and a member of Cabinet. Safe Labor seat. He held it with a margin, well, it has a margin of 13.8%, and we've got 75% of the vote counted.
It's currently known as Prospect. It's a very safe Labor seat, covers the area around Prospect Reservoir, and at this stage, Chris Bowen is easily returned. He's got more than 50% of the vote. We've got a swing in that electorate of 5.8% to the Liberal Party, and at this stage, that's 5.7%. But Chris Bowen will be comfortably returned in McMahon.
OK, the seat of North Sydney. This is Joe Hockey's seat, the Shadow Treasurer, who may... sorry, we're going to make a slight change there, because I'm told Bob Brown, the Green leader, is on the tally room floor. We're just going to cross quickly to him.
We will use it to look after farmlands in Australia. The National Party got 4% of the vote tonight. We got 12% of the vote. So it's a very, very wonderful night. I might add, on a vote-for-vote basis, the Greens on 12% would be having 17 seats in the lower house. And it's time we move to proportional representation so that everybody's vote is equal in this country. One person, one vote, one value. I thank the people of Australia. I congratulate both the coalition team with Mr Abbott and the Labor team with Prime Minister Gillard. I congratulate all candidates and all parties who took part. I also want to, while she's taken Gary Humphries below a quota, Lynn Hatfield-Dodds is certainly now a very outside chance in the Senate, but she's just won the biggest state or provincial Greens vote anywhere in the world, topping the Belgian Flemish Greens for the biggest vote in anywhere in the world. A great result for Lynn Hatfield-Dodds, and we'll take that seat in the ACT next time round.
What do you think about the possibility of a hung parliament? Is that encouraging for the Greens?
Well, I think that good government's what's encouraging, and the Australian people may have the Greens involved in that situation, and we'll deliver a good result out of it. Our job is to keep governments accountable, as well as to get a better dividend. We did that in the last period of government. We'll do it in the next one.
Bob Brown, does this put climate change right back on the agenda?
It's clear the Greens will have the balance of power in the Senate. We'll use that responsibly, and to make whoever's government more accountable. Now, what happens in the House of Representatives is just in the hands of the voters and those late votes coming in. The bushwalkers vote, by the way, always comes in well for the Greens, those postal votes coming from overseas and people are absentee. So factor that in, but we'll wait and see. We have a great experience in the balance of power. The Greens more than any other party, so we'll put that to good use, and I assure the people of Australia every vote that's gone to the Greens will be valued, And as Adam Bandt said tonight, we'll be looking to the whole of electorate of Australia when we make decisions, both about the issues as they come up, but about the makeup of the next government if that becomes necessary.
What does this mean for climate change?
The swing to the Greens is because we held firm on the mining tax to help fund education, because we want to put a carbon levy not onto the taxpayers as the big parties would, but onto the polluters. We want to, and let me not forget this one, it was a huge issue in the electorate, we want to end the discrimination against same-sex couples in marriage. And so that everybody who loves each other, as Adam said, may be able to marry if they wish to without discrimination in this wonderful country of ours. We'll help drag both the big parties, one in government, one in opposition, into the 21st century for Australia.
There was a lot of between towards the two major parties.
There was increasing disillusion, but people also loved what we Greens were saying, what Sarah had to say about compassion to asylum seekers, what Christine had to say about a carbon tax, what Rachel was doing in getting flexible work hours for parents of disabled children, what Scott was doing in ensuring we get a national broadband network. I do think if the coalition doesn't win government, it'll be because of national broadband network. People in Australia do want to be in the 21st century, for goodness sake.
Bob Brown, what do you say to the people who voted for the Green side?
Victoria, what are the other 3 seats, the 7 seats that you're going to
We, according to the computers, will win a seat, Senate seat in each state. Early days in Western Australia, but Rachel Seward will get back in Western Australia.
What do you say to the people who voted for the Green slate?
I say to everybody who voted Green today, thank you. You've really made your vote powerful. You really will have a voice in the greening of Australia, which is good for the economy, good for our society, good for lifestyle, and good for the generations coming after us. And I'll give you this commitment. We'll measure everything in this Parliament by the security of this nation's future, and on a general dictum, if it's good for our grandchildren, it's good for us. That's a pretty good rule in politics, and for a party that's looking at building this nation with high-speed rail, light rail in our cities, securing our farmlands, renewable energy, protecting our forests, looking after those marine reserves which we're committed to assure the future of fishing and marine ecosystems, and education and health in this country. Voting Green today was the most powerful vote in Australia. So those who had that wisdom, I congratulate you. For those who thought about it, next time you'll see the Greens will give you a good dividend this time.
Okay, I'm just going to check again on... We're just a few enthusiastic Bob Brown supporters there in the background. We're just going to do a dip back into Western Australia to see if that picture is clarifying at all, because a moment ago Nick Minchin was thinking that with the seat of Hasluck the coalition could have 73 seats in the Parliament. Stephen Smith, you've got some more information on Hasluck?
I think Hasluck will really go down to the wire, and we've just gone through it with our sort of best scrutineer. It's all, as so many seats are, subject to postals and what pre-polls haven't been counted. I think we can win Hasluck by a couple of hundred votes. So that one's not out of the ballpark.
Nick's got one of those smiles on his face that says...
Well, I'll concede that we can put it in the undecided, but I think there's at this stage a swing on that would give us the seat, but I think it's going to be one of several seats that will actually be undecided tonight. We're not going to know who's going to govern this country tonight. That's quite clear.
I think Hasluck, Corangamite, sort of Greenway, a few others. We're all...
Lindsay.
They're the ones
Lindsay still in the outfit?
Lindsay's still in the line ball
They're the ones that make them 73, 74,
That's
one
right.
way or the other.
Well, just let me get this straight. When in terms of numbers of seats and the volume of vote, if one of you ends up with the 73 seats but the other has the maximum two-party preferred vote, it's the one with the biggest number of seats that should get first opportunity to call a minority government, is it not? Or
Well, there are no rules for this.
No, I
Kerry.
know.
Unfortunately,
I know.
it's not in the Constitution. It's going to be a matter
who would
for
get
the...
to sit down first?
Well, first it'll be a matter whether the three Conservative independents decide to act as a bloc. The three of them will go one way or the other, and then whether they want two stipulations, the majority vote and the plurality of seats. If they don't match up, which way are they going to go? And then it'll be a negotiation. But I would hope that those Conservative independents representing Conservative communities would be inclined to support us, particularly if we've got a majority of the two-party preferred vote and there's only one seat in it between Labor and Liberal, which is, looking...
And Nick's probably very much hoping that the coalition leadership are much nicer to those three fellas than they have been in the past.
I've always been very
They
nice
didn't
to
leave
them,
the
Stephen.
Nationals for nothing.
They didn't leave. Anyway,
Well,
I think...
we Liberals get on well with all of them. actually.
Tony Windsor got a bus contract in the new courthouse out of Nick
Very quickly, because we've got some people who are standing by.
Relevant factors will be two-party preferred vote, number of seats, and I'm assuming that the incumbent Prime Minister gets the chance to try and put something together in the first instance. But as Nick says, well, there are rules, but we're breaking new ground for the first time since 1961. Yeah.
Well, 1940.
No, 1940.
61.
Yeah, Menzies
1940,
actually got a one-seat majority.
Yes.
Now, we're going to take a look at the seat of Sturt in South Australia, because we've got Christopher Pyne, who has cemented his position in that seat, standing by. Now, he did have a margin of 0.9% going into this vote today, but with 70% of the vote counted, he's recorded a near 3% swing to him.
Yes, and considering some of the other seats in South Australia where the Labor vote has increased, Christopher Pyne's done quite well in comparison in Sturt. Got a clear lead in the first preference votes. We know where that information is from in terms of preference counts, and we're predicting there's a swing of 2.8% to him. And Christopher Pyne will be comfortably returned in Sturt as the member.
And Christopher Pyne is standing by. So what was your formula for success, Christopher Pyne? You were up against it in the last election as well. You've actually gained some of that vote back against the predictions of how the vote would go in South Australia.
Well, Kerry, the Labor Party threw everything at Sturt and Boothby in this election. They outspent us 2-1. They targeted it. They talked it up. But the electors of Sturt bucked the trend and have given me at least a 3% swing. Probably after postals and pre-polls it'll be about 3.5%, so we'll end up with about a 4.4% margin. I'm very grateful to them, and the formula for our success was hard work and focus.
And but in terms of that focus, what are the issues that you'd isolate that did it for you?
The number one issue overall amongst all others, although things like mental health, education were very important, but the number one issue was the Murray and the feeling in South Australia that the Gillard government and the Rudd government had let South Australians down, and the attempt by Penny Wong to try and pretend that they'd done something about water for Adelaide and water for South Australia when they hadn't, and the fact that Tony Abbott showed leadership on the Murray and had a genuine policy which was good for the whole basin and also good for Adelaide and South Australia. That was the number one issue.
At the same time, your colleague in the seat of Boothby is struggling to hold on to that seat. What's your gut feeling about Boothby?
Look, I think Andrew will be returned, Kerry. On election night, last election, I was 72 votes ahead. You might remember I declared victory and announced I was running for Deputy Leader, which seemed a little excessive at the time, but I did. Andrew Southcott is ahead. After pre-polls and postals, I'm very certain that he'll be elected, so there'll be no change in South Australia, and Labor were certainly counting their chickens in this state before they hatched. They'd already notched up Sturt and Boothby, and we held them off very successfully in both seats.
And Christopher Pyne, thanks for taking the time to talk with us tonight. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks, Kerry.
Now, there's another seat that we're going to take a quick look at, and this is a remarkable story tonight. This is the seat of Longman in just north of Brisbane, and the youngest parliamentarian now in Australian history, Wyatt Roy. But we'll take a look at the seat first, where the Labor member Joe Sullivan had a margin of 1.9%. but he suffered a 4.3% swing. Anthony?
Well, this is the seat that Mal Brough used to hold. John Sullivan's a former state member for the area, was later and then won this seat, defeating Mal Brough at the last election. His wife Karen is also a local state MP. Now, this is next door to Dixon, where Peter Dutton has been re-elected. But on these figures, Wyatt Roy was clearly ahead on the first preference votes. We've had a distribution of preferences. We've got a 4.3% swing, and at this stage, it looks like Wyatt Roy has been elected to Parliament. I'm pretty sure the youngest member ever elected to the Australian Parliament.
Now, we're going to make history again because we're going to cut to Wyatt Roy in the dark.